The warning: emerges empire. The peaceful world of Earth-7 had always been a beacon of hope and tranquility in the galaxy. It was a place where humans lived with an undying spirit of resilience, making it an ideal home for future generations. The colonists on this remote planet were content, focusing on advancing their technology and thriving in harmony with the natural surroundings. However, all of that was about to change. It all started one quiet morning when the sky over the colony turned a strange shade of red. At first, it was just a curious sight. The residents thought it was some kind of atmospheric disturbance. But when the communications officer, Captain Leela Martins, received a strange signal, something felt off. The signal was broken, filled with static, but one word echoed through the interference: Empire. Captain Martins sat up straight in her command chair. She had heard stories of galactic empires, vast, powerful forces that ruled entire systems with an iron fist, but she never thought they would reach Earth-7. This planet had been far off the usual trade routes. Why would anyone bother with it? Yet the message made it clear: an invasion was imminent. The Empire was coming. Her hands trembled slightly as she passed the message to her superior, Commander Jace Daniels. Commander Daniels was known for his calm demeanor, but even he couldn't hide the concern in his eyes when he heard the news. He looked out at the stars, deep in thought. The Empire had a reputation for being relentless, and they had never been known for mercy. Their arrival meant certain destruction for any who resisted them. Captain, send an emergency broadcast of every colony in this sector. We need to prepare, Commander Daniels ordered, his voice steady, but there was a hard edge to it now. We don't have much time. Leela nodded. She could feel the weight of his words. The countdown had already begun. In the distance, the sensors were picking up signs of something massive, something powerful, approaching. It wasn't just one ship, but a fleet strong enough to wipe out every colony in its path. Hours passed, and the tension in the command room grew. The once peaceful atmosphere had turned into one of urgency and panic. As the fleet grew nearer, the people of Earth-7 started to realize the true scope of the threat. News spread quickly, and the faces of the colonists became filled with fear. They were good at surviving, but this was different. They had never faced a force like the Empire. At that moment, Leela and Commander Daniels made a difficult decision. They needed to act, and they needed to do so quickly. The people of Earth-7 would need to abandon their homes if they were going to survive. But there was a problem. No one had ever planned for an evacuation on such a large scale. The Empire would be upon them soon, and the only chance for survival was to run, to escape, and to hope they could find a way to fight back later. Leela looked at Commander Daniels, who was lost in thought. He knew there was no turning back. He had to make sure Earth-7 didn't fall without a fight. We need to activate the emergency escape routes, he said, his voice now filled with determination. We'll send everyone to the hidden spaceports in the mountain ranges. It's their only chance. The problem was that the spaceports hadn't been used in years, and the path to reach them wasn't easy. The terrain was dangerous, filled with dense forests, mountains, and old, forgotten ruins. To make matters worse, the Empire's scouts would be searching for them as soon as they began their evacuation. Time was against them. The orders went out quickly. Lila's voice rang out over the intercom, directing every citizen to gather their belongings and prepare for evacuation. The sound of hurried footsteps echoed through the hallways as families scrambled to pack what little they could. A sense of panic had begun to spread, but they couldn't afford to let fear control them. As Leela watched people rush to safety, she couldn't help but feel a knot in her stomach. The calm, peaceful life they had all known was ending, and the fight for survival was just beginning. There was no turning back now. The Empire would stop at nothing to claim Earth-7, and she had no doubt that the next few hours would be the most crucial in their history. Back in the command center, Commander Daniels was already giving orders to the fleet's remaining ships, preparing them to launch when the time came. But even as the engines began to hum, something gnawed at him. Was this really their only chance? Could they escape, or would the Empire find them before they even got off the planet? Every decision felt like a gamble. Then, as the last shuttle lifted off, the first signs of the Empire's fleet appeared on the horizon. The ships were enormous, their dark silhouettes cutting through the red sky like shadows of doom. They were here, and Earth 7 was about to become their next target. Leela stared at the fleet on the monitors. Her heart pounded in her chest. "They're not just here to conquer," she said softly. "They're here to destroy." Commander Daniels looked at her, his expression grim. "Then we'll make them regret it." The countdown to survival had begun. The next few hours would determine the fate of Earth 7, and Leela and her team would have to rely on everything they had: courage, resourcefulness, and determination to escape the Empire's grasp. But one thing was clear: the warning had come, and there was no turning back now. The escape plan. The first wave of the Empire's fleet arrived in the planet's orbit, and Earth 7 trembled under the weight of impending destruction. The air was thick with fear as everyone realized that survival was no longer a matter of simply avoiding danger. It was about escaping a force they could not fight. Captain Leela Martin stood in the command room, her eyes scanning the massive fleet on the monitors. The Empire's ships were much larger than anything the colonists had ever seen. The scale of the threat was overwhelming. Still, she pushed back her panic and focused. She had a job to do. Earth 7's survival depended on her. Commander Jace Daniels paced the room, his face lined with worry. "We have to get to the hidden spaceports in the mountains," he said. His voice was steady, but Leela could hear the anxiety beneath it. "If we don't, we're all dead. The Empire will hunt us down if we stay here." Leela nodded. She had known this was coming. An invasion, an overwhelming force, and nowhere to run. But now, there was a plan. It wasn't perfect, and it didn't guarantee survival, but it was their only option. She turned to the tech officer, Lieutenant Tessa Grant, who had been working furiously at the terminal. "What's the status on the escape routes?" Tessa didn't look up from her screen. "They're still operational, but there's a catch. We can't evacuate everyone at once. There are only a few ships left, and the routes through the mountains are dangerous. It'll be a long and perilous journey." "We don't have a choice," Leela replied, determination in her voice. "We'll make it work." The escape plan was simple in theory. Use the old, forgotten spaceports hidden deep in the mountains to launch a small fleet off the planet. They would avoid the Empire's main attack forces and take the safest, least obvious route. But in reality, it was far from simple. The mountains were treacherous. The paths were narrow and overgrown, littered with old ruins and natural hazards. Worse still, the Empire had already begun to scout the area, sending drones and small ships to track any movement. Time was running out. The Empire was closing in faster than expected. Leela quickly gathered a team: engineers, fighters, and trusted allies. Together, they would have to navigate through the dangerous wilderness and get to the spaceport undetected. The small group would leave immediately, while the rest of the colony began evacuating in small batches. Their success would rely on speed, stealth, and luck. "Everyone ready?" Leela asked, looking each of her team members in the eye. They were scared, but they were also determined. This was the moment. It was do or die. Each member of the team nodded. There was no turning back now. The group set off as darkness fell. The air was thick with tension, and every footstep felt like it could be their last. They moved quickly but quietly, staying hidden in the shadows of the dense forest surrounding the colony. The plan was simple: avoid detection at all costs. But the forest itself had its dangers: unstable terrain, wild animals, and old traps from the planet's long-forgotten past could kill them just as easily as the Empire's forces. As they moved deeper into the forest, the sounds of the world around them grew louder, an eerie mix of natural noises and the occasional hum of Empire drones searching the area. The team stayed low, moving swiftly through the trees, avoiding open spaces where they might be seen. Every time they heard a noise, they froze, their hearts pounding in their chests. The group came to a narrow pass between two high cliffs. There was a hidden path here, one that had been used for centuries by travelers seeking to avoid detection. It was risky, but it was the quickest way to the spaceport. "Keep your eyes open," Leela whispered to the team. "We're getting close, but this is where it gets dangerous." Just as she spoke, a faint noise reached their ears, a low buzz. Then the faint glow of a drone's searchlight flickered in the distance. The Empire's scouts were close, too close. "Move," Leela commanded. The team sprinted through the pass, their hearts racing. The light grew brighter, closer, until it seemed to be right on top of them. One wrong move and they'd be spotted. "Get to the cover," Leela ordered. They dove into the thick underbrush just as the drone's light swept across the narrow pass. The group held their breath, waiting for the sound of the drone to pass. Every second felt like an eternity. Leila kept her eyes on the light, ready to move at a moment's notice. Finally, after what seemed like forever, the drone's light moved away, and the sound of its engines faded. The group exhaled in unison, relief washing over them. But they knew they couldn't stop yet. Every second was precious. The Empire was relentless. They had to keep moving. As they pressed on, the feeling of danger only grew. The road ahead was uncertain, and every step they took brought them closer to the spaceport and to the Empire's forces. Layla couldn't help but wonder if they would make it, if the escape plan would succeed. The odds were against them, but the choice was clear. They had to keep going. "Don't stop now," she whispered to her team. "We're almost there." And with that, they pushed forward into the dark night, unsure of what awaited them, but knowing that the fight for survival was far from over. Into the wilderness. The team had been traveling for hours, weaving through the dense forest as the night deepened around them. The trees were thick, their branches interlaced so tightly that little moonlight filtered through. The air felt damp, and the underbrush was thick with roots that seemed to reach out and trip them at every step. But the group moved swiftly, knowing that every minute they spent in the open increased their chances of being discovered by the Empire's drones. Captain Leela Martins led the way, her sharp eyes scanning the path ahead, listening for any sound of danger. She could feel the tension building in her chest with every step they took. The Empire's drones were relentless, constantly scanning the area from above. She knew they had to move quickly to avoid detection, but the path was anything but easy. The team was making its way toward a narrow ravine that led to the spaceport hidden deep within the mountains. It was their best chance to escape, but it was also the most dangerous route. There were few paths that could lead to the spaceport without being noticed, and the ravine was one of the most treacherous places on the planet. Lieutenant Tessa Grant, who had been monitoring the Empire's movements on her portable device, glanced up from the screen. "They're getting closer," she said quietly, her voice laced with concern. "2 drones are patrolling the area ahead. We'll need to move quickly if we don't want to be caught." Leela nodded, her mind racing. "We can't afford to be caught. Stay sharp." The group moved on, their steps light and careful. The deeper they went into the forest, the more treacherous the terrain became. The ravine was a maze of rocks and boulders, some of which had been loose for years, threatening to send anyone who wasn't careful tumbling down into the dark, jagged depths below. As they approached a narrow ledge above the ravine, a rustling noise startled them. One of the team members, Private Lucas Bray, slipped, his foot catching on a loose rock. He gasped as he tried to regain his balance, but the sound of his fall was enough to alert anyone nearby. "Stay down," Leela whispered urgently, pressing her hand to Lucas's shoulder. He froze, his heart racing. The group held their breath. Lila's eyes darted back toward the path, her heart pounding as the sound of the approaching drone grew louder. The glow from its searchlight swept through the trees, illuminating the shadows. They were dangerously close. The drone's light passed over them, but it was slow to move away. Every second felt like an eternity. Lila's heart was in her throat, but she kept her eyes fixed on the light, willing the drone to move. Finally, the light began to move off into the distance, and the team released their breath in unison. The close call had rattled them, but they didn't have the luxury of time. The team quickly regained their footing and moved into the ravine, hugging the walls for cover. "The Empire is getting closer," Tessa said quietly as she continued to monitor the drones. "We need to make it to the spaceport before they catch up." Lila nodded, but she didn't say anything. There was nothing more to say. They had to keep moving. The Empire had already begun its search in full force, and the longer they stayed in the open, the more likely it was they'd be discovered. Their only hope was to reach the spaceport in time and escape before the Empire launched an all-out attack. The further they moved into the ravine, the darker and more claustrophobic it became. The walls seemed to close in around them, and the air grew thick and heavy. They couldn't afford to stop. Every moment counted. The team pushed through the narrow passages, trying to move as silently as possible. As they neared the end of the ravine, they were met with another challenge. A huge boulder blocked their path, forcing them to climb over it. It was an obstacle they hadn't anticipated, and it slowed them down even further. They couldn't afford to waste any time, but there was no choice. The group worked quickly, helping each other up the rocks and over the large boulder. Lila scanned the surrounding area, the tension never leaving her chest. The drones could be anywhere. She felt the weight of their lives resting on every decision they made, on every move they took. The plan had been simple, but the execution was proving to be more difficult than any of them had anticipated. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the group reached the other side of the ravine and saw a faint light in the distance, the hidden spaceport. It was only a few miles away now, but the journey ahead was still full of danger. The Empire's drones were surely closing in, and they needed to get there before the entire area was swarming with enemy forces. Lila's pulse quickened as she scanned the surroundings. "We're almost there," she whispered. "Stay alert. No one makes a sound." The team moved forward, hearts pounding, eyes scanning the trees and the sky. The final stretch of their journey was still ahead, and the tension was unbearable. There was no room for error now. But as they drew closer to the spaceport, Lila couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Her instincts screamed at her that they weren't alone, that the Empire was waiting for them. She turned to the team and motioned for them to halt. Her senses were on edge, every fiber of her being telling her to be careful. "Stay low," she whispered. "Something doesn't feel right." The group dropped to the ground, huddling behind the thick trees and waiting. They couldn't afford to take any chances now. The sound of a drone's engines grew louder once again, and Lila's worst fear was realized. They had been followed. The Empire knew they were here. A betrayal uncovered. The team crouched low behind the trees, the noise of the approaching Empire drone growing louder with every passing second. The tension was unbearable. Lila's heart raced as she scanned the darkened forest, trying to make out any signs of movement. The spaceport was close now, just beyond the next ridge, but they couldn't afford to be caught. Lila looked over at Lieutenant Tessa Grant, who was holding the portable tracker with a focused expression. Tessa was their eyes on the enemy, her technology providing them with vital information about the Empire's movements. "How close are they?" Lila whispered, her voice barely audible. Tessa's eyes flicked over the tracker. "Too close. There's a group of them moving through the woods. We've got less than 5 minutes before they reach us." The team exchanged worried glances. They had to move. The spaceport was their only hope, but with the Empire's scouts closing in, there was no time to waste. Lila raised her hand, signaling the team to stay low and quiet. They had to make it to the spaceport without being detected. As they began to move once more, something caught Lila's eye. She turned quickly, a strange feeling gnawing at her gut. One of their team members, Corporal Alex Reed, had fallen behind. He was moving too slowly. Lila didn't like it. She was about to motion for him to hurry up when something else stopped her. She noticed that Alex was subtly glancing around, making sure the others weren't looking. Leela's instincts kicked in. She stopped in her tracks, and her heart sank. Something was wrong. "Hold up," Leela whispered to the others. The team froze immediately, eyes darting to her. Leela moved quietly toward Alex, trying to stay out of sight. She didn't know what it was, but something about his behavior had raised a red flag. When she was close enough, she saw it. He was holding something in his hand, a small communication device, one that didn't belong to any of the team. Lila's heart skipped a beat. She waited for a few moments, watching Alex, then moved swiftly to confront him. "Alex," she said, her voice calm but firm. Alex jumped at the sound of his name, quickly hiding the device behind his back. "What's wrong, Captain?" Leela narrowed her eyes. "What are you hiding?" Alex looked nervous now, his usual calm demeanor faltering. "Nothing. Just making sure everything is fine." He was sweating, and Leela could see the lie in his eyes. Leela took a step forward, her voice low but firm. "I saw you. You're not fooling me." For a moment, there was silence. Then Alex let out a sigh. He turned and looked around quickly, as if considering his options. He seemed to weigh the decision in his mind before finally dropping the device into the dirt. "I'm sorry," he said, looking ashamed. "I didn't mean for this to happen." Leela's heart raced as she picked up the device. It was a small advanced communicator, one that only the Empire could have used. It had been transmitting their location to the enemy. "You've been sending our position to the Empire." Leila's voice was barely above a whisper, but the anger in it was clear. "Why? Why would you betray us?" Alex looked down, ashamed. "They threatened my family. They said they'd kill them if I didn't help. I had no choice, Captain." Leela stared at him, her thoughts racing. She wanted to be angry, wanted to lash out, but she couldn't. She understood the fear he felt. The Empire's threats were not idle. They would stop at nothing to break the human spirit. "Did they know about the spaceport?" Leela demanded. Alex hesitated, then nodded. I told them everything. I didn't want to. But they have agents everywhere. They know you're heading there. They're preparing an ambush." Leela's blood ran cold. "How much time do we have?" "Not much," Alex replied, his voice trembling. "The drones will be on you in minutes." Leela turned to the rest of the team. They were all watching, some with anger, others with disbelief. Tessa looked at Lila with a question in her eyes, and the others were waiting for orders. Leela's mind raced. The betrayal stung, but there was no time to dwell on it. They needed to act fast. She took a deep breath, her decision firm. "We can't go to the spaceport anymore. We'll have to move to the backup location." She turned to Tessa. "How far is it?" Tessa quickly checked the map. "It's at least 5 miles away, through rough terrain. It'll be hard to get there without being seen." Leela's mind spun. 5 miles was far. It would take time, and the Empire was already closing in on them. They had to move quickly if they were going to survive. She turned back to Alex. "You're going to help us now," Leela said, her voice cold but resolute. "You betrayed us, but right now, we need everyone. If you want to make things right, help us get to the backup location. Otherwise, you're on your own." Alex nodded, his face pale. "I understand. I'll help you." Leela didn't say anything else. There was no room for forgiveness now, only survival. The team turned and began moving again, each member feeling the weight of what had just happened. Trust had been broken, but there was no time to mourn it. They needed to stay focused if they were going to make it out alive. The Empire's drones were closing in, and the countdown to survival had begun again. The final countdown. The betrayal had shaken the team, but there was no time to dwell on it. They had to keep moving. The backup location was their only hope, and the Empire was closing in. As Leela led her team through the dense woods, her thoughts raced. The Empire's drones were relentless, and they couldn't afford another misstep. If they didn't reach the backup spaceport, they would all be trapped. But even as they pushed forward, Leela couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was still to come. The path to the backup location wasn't easy. The terrain was rough, the air thick with humidity, and every step felt like it brought them closer to danger. The forest seemed endless, with only the sound of their hurried footsteps breaking the silence. They moved quickly, but silently, knowing that the Empire was tracking their every move. The trees above blocked out the light, casting long shadows that made it harder to see. Tessa, still carrying the portable tracker, looked up from her screen. "They're getting closer," she said, her voice tight. "The drones are moving fast. They're less than 2 miles away." Leela's heart raced as the weight of her responsibility pressed down on her. The countdown was ticking, and there was no way to stop it. If they didn't reach the spaceport in time, they'd be caught, and the Empire would wipe them out without mercy. "We can't stop," Leela said, her voice firm. "We make it to the spaceport, or we don't make it out at all." They pushed forward, moving with urgency. Every noise, every rustle of leaves, made them jump, their nerves frayed to the breaking point. There was no room for error. If the Empire found them now, they would be doomed. Suddenly, a noise cut through the silence. A low hum, the sound of a drone's engine. Leela's heart skipped a beat. "Down," she hissed, pulling the team to the ground. The group dropped to the forest floor, taking cover behind large rocks and thick foliage. The drone passed overhead, its lights sweeping across the trees. Leela held her breath, praying it wouldn't stop. It was so close, they could feel the heat from the drone's exhaust. Every second felt like an eternity. The drone's searchlight moved away, and Leela exhaled in relief. But they couldn't rest. The enemy was relentless, and they had to keep moving. "We're almost there," Tessa whispered, glancing at her tracker. "The spaceport should be just beyond that ridge." Leela nodded, but her mind was still racing. She knew they were running out of time. They had to move faster, but the terrain was growing more difficult by the minute. The path narrowed, the ground became uneven, and sharp rocks jutted out from the earth, ready to trip anyone who wasn't careful. Then, just as they were rounding a bend, Leela heard it, the unmistakable sound of a heavy footfall. She froze, turning her head slowly. From the corner of her eye, she saw a shadow moving toward them, large and threatening. It wasn't a drone. It was something worse. "Empire soldiers," Leela whispered, her voice barely audible. "Get down." The team dropped to the ground, pressing themselves into the earth, hoping the thick foliage would hide them. Leela held her breath, waiting, her heart thudding in her chest. She could hear the soldiers' footsteps growing louder, their voices low but clear. "They've got to be close," one of the soldiers said. "The tracker shows them heading this way. If we don't find them now, we're not going to make it." The fear in the soldier's voice sent a chill down Leela's spine. The Empire was closing in, and their time was nearly up. They had to move quickly, but they couldn't risk being seen. Leela motioned for the team to stay down, then slowly began to crawl toward the ridge. Every muscle in her body screamed at her to move faster, but they had no choice. If they made a sound, they'd be discovered. The soldiers came closer, their heavy boots crunching on the leaves. Leela held her breath, willing herself to stay still. She could feel the ground beneath her, rough and unforgiving, but there was no choice. They had to make it to the spaceport. The soldiers passed by just a few feet away, and Leela's heart pounded in her chest. But they were in the clear, at least for now. As the soldiers moved further down the path, the group began to stir, slowly and quietly. "We need to move." "Now," Leela urged in a hushed tone. The team crawled out from their hiding spots and resumed their trek toward the spaceport. Each step felt like it could be their last. Lila's eyes were fixed on the ridge ahead, knowing that the spaceport was just on the other side. With every passing second, they were closer to the final goal, but also closer to being caught. Every footstep was crucial. Every noise, every movement could cost them their lives. Then suddenly, the ridge opened up. The spaceport, a series of hidden hangars carved into the mountain, came into view. It was within reach, finally. But there was no time to celebrate. The Empire's drones were still circling, and the soldiers were still searching for them. They had to make it inside the hangars before they were caught. Leela led the team into a narrow entrance, her pulse racing as they ducked into the darkened tunnel that led to the heart of the spaceport. The hangars were empty, save for a few old ships and storage crates. But the promise of escape was real. The countdown was almost over. "Let's move. Get the ships ready," Leela ordered. "We leave in 5 minutes, or we don't leave at all." The team rushed to prepare the ships, their hands trembling with anticipation. They had made it this far, but now they had to launch. The Empire was on their tail, and they couldn't afford to fail now. The countdown to survival was nearly finished, and they had one final chance to escape. The battle for survival. The spaceport was within their grasp. It was the only thing standing between them and the Empire, but Leela knew their journey wasn't over yet. The spaceport's entrance was a narrow, dimly lit tunnel, and as they moved deeper inside, the echoes of their footsteps seemed to grow louder, as though the walls themselves were closing in on them. But the danger wasn't behind them anymore. It was ahead. Leela moved swiftly, her pulse racing, as the team scrambled to ready the ships. The hangars were empty, save for a few old ships that had been left behind after the last emergency evacuation years ago. These were their only hope. But there was one big problem. The Empire knew they were here. Tessa had been monitoring the movement of the drones, and now her voice broke through the tense silence. "They're right outside. They'll be here in minutes." Leela cursed under her breath. The Empire had tracked them this far, and now there was no turning back. They had to fight their way out. "Get to the ships," she ordered, her voice steady despite the fear building in her chest. "We need to launch immediately." The team rushed to the nearby control consoles, quickly trying to activate the ships. The engines were cold, and it would take a few minutes to warm them up, time they didn't have. Lila looked over her shoulder at the others as they worked. Every face was tense, filled with the knowledge that their survival depended on getting off the ground. Now, suddenly, the loud thud of footsteps echoed through the hangar. The soldiers were here. "Move. Now," Leela shouted, pulling out her sidearm and running to the entrance. She knew the soldiers would be there any second. The team needed more time, but there was no more time to give. Leela and the rest of the team took cover behind the old storage crates, their hearts pounding in their chests. The Empire soldiers, clad in dark armor, moved in with precision, their weapons drawn. The air was thick with the sound of their footsteps, the anticipation of a battle that had no guaranteed victor. "I'll cover you," Leela said, turning to the others. "Get those ships ready. I'll hold them off." Tessa, still working frantically at the control console, looked up. "We don't have enough time, Leila. We need to leave now." But Lila didn't hesitate. She turned to face the oncoming soldiers, her resolve clear. "I'll buy you all the time I can." The first wave of soldiers entered the hangar. Leela aimed her weapon, her fingers steady, and fired. The sound of gunfire rang out, echoing through the hangar. The soldiers ducked behind cover, returning fire, their laser blasts lighting up the darkened space. The team scrambled to get the ships online, but with every shot Leela fired, more soldiers flooded in. The battle had begun. Leela ducked behind a metal crate, narrowly avoiding a blast from the Empire soldiers. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she reloaded, her mind focused on the task at hand. Survival. She couldn't let them get to the ships. Not yet. They had to buy just a little more time. Come on," she muttered under her breath as she fired again, taking out 2 soldiers who had tried to advance. The team worked frantically to get the ships powered up, and Leela knew the pressure was mounting. Each second counted. The Empire soldiers were getting closer, and their fire was growing more intense. 5 minutes, Tessa called out, her voice tense. Engines are almost ready. We just need more time. Leela nodded, her hand gripping the weapon tight. She didn't have 5 minutes. She needed to act fast. The soldiers were advancing, and it wouldn't be long before they overran their position. Suddenly, the sound of more boots on the ground filled the air. Lila's heart skipped a beat. They were surrounded. Fall back, she shouted, signaling to the team. To the ships. Now. With a sudden burst of energy, the group dashed towards the waiting vessels. The soldiers fired relentlessly, but Layla's team made it to the ships, slipping inside just as the last of the shots rang out. The engines roared to life as Tessa slammed the button to initiate the launch sequence. Leela jumped into the cockpit of the nearest ship, quickly securing her harness. Her hands moved with practiced precision, flipping switches and pulling levers to get the ship in the air. Outside, the soldiers continued their assault, but it was too late. The ships lifted off, slowly at first, but then gaining speed as they broke through the hangar's protective shield. The Empire's soldiers were left standing below, unable to stop their escape. Leela's heart raced as the ship climbed higher into the sky, leaving the planet's surface behind. But as they shot into the atmosphere, she knew this wasn't the end. It wasn't even close. The battle had just begun. Escape to victory. The ship soared into the cold void of space, leaving Earth 7 behind in a swirl of dust and fire. The weight of what they had just done settled heavily in Leela's chest. They had made it, barely. The Empire had been closing in, but the team had managed to escape. For now, they were safe. But safety was fleeting in a galaxy dominated by the Empire. As the ships entered the outer rim of the system, Leela turned her attention to the monitors in front of her. The team's ships were scattered across the stars, each one maneuvering toward their new destination. They weren't out of danger yet. The Empire had eyes everywhere, and the vast expanse of space was their hunting ground. They were vulnerable, alone, and exposed. Tessa's voice crackled through the comms. Captain, we've got a problem. Empire ships are in pursuit. I'm picking up signals. They know we're gone. Leela clenched her fists, gripping the controls tighter. How many ships are following us? Tessa paused for a moment before responding. 3 warships. They've got the advantage in speed and firepower. Leela's mind raced. The Empire wasn't going to give up that easily. She knew the Empire's warships were fast and heavily armed. If they could catch up, it would be over for them. We need to outrun them, Leela said, her voice filled with urgency. Tessa, I need every ounce of power we can get. Prepare to jump to the next sector. But the space was vast, and the jump had to be calculated precisely. One misstep, and they'd end up in the middle of nowhere, far from any refuge. We'll need a few minutes to plot the jump, Tessa replied, her voice tight with focus. And even then, we might not make it before they close in. Leela's mind was working fast. If they stayed in this system, they would be sitting ducks. But if they made the jump, it could be their only chance to get away. Do it, Leela said, her voice unwavering. Plot the course. We'll make it. The hum of the ship's engines filled the cockpit as the team prepared for the jump. Every second felt like a lifetime as the enemy ships closed in. The tension was suffocating. They were running out of time. We've got 1 minute, Tessa warned. Hold tight. Leela glanced out the viewport at the darkness of space, the cold, unfeeling vastness. The stars stretched out before them, a sea of distant lights. They were all alone, cut off from everything they had known. But they had each other, and they had one chance to survive. Everyone ready. Leela called out over the comms. The voices of her team echoed back. Ready. Leela took a deep breath, preparing herself for what was coming. They were about to make the jump. The Empire was closing in, but this was their only shot. Now, she ordered. Tessa initiated the jump sequence, A burst of light and energy flashed through the cockpit as the ship surged forward, faster than the eye could track. The world around them bent and twisted as they tore through space, leaving the Empire's warships behind. The stars seemed to stretch, then twist and fold in on themselves as the jump took hold. For a moment, everything was silent. The ships were in limbo, traveling faster than they had ever gone before. The team gripped their seats, their faces tense, knowing that everything depended on the next few seconds. And then, with a sudden jolt, the ship emerged in a new sector, a different part of the galaxy, far from the Empire's reach. They had made it. Leela exhaled, her breath shaky but relieved. She looked at the readouts on the monitors, confirming that they had successfully made the jump. They were safe for now. The Empire had lost them. "We did it," Tessa breathed, her voice filled with wonder. "We're free." Leela looked out the viewport again. The stars were peaceful, distant, and beautiful. But the relief was only temporary. The battle was far from over. The Empire was vast, and they would not stop hunting them. But in this moment, they had won. They had escaped. They had survived. "We may be free now," Leela said, her voice calm but firm. "But this war isn't over. The Empire will come after us. And when they do, we'll be ready." Her words echoed in the silence of the ship, a promise to herself and to her team. They had escaped to victory, but they would keep fighting, no matter what it took, because humans, when pushed to the brink, had a way of rising up, no matter the odds. They had escaped today, but tomorrow, they would fight, and they would never stop.